Yeah, and it's cool. It's actually
my mastering engineer Connor, I think, interned with him or worked there at some point. Connor Salmaro.
Connor's awesome. I know him too. Yeah. So it's like kind of a Toronto, like, you know, he's like one of the OG Toronto mastering guys. It's also across the street from a studio called Revolution. That's one of the A-list kind of places here that I work there sometimes.
I've heard about these places, but I've never seen them.
Okay, yeah. Revolution's like it's like a nice A-list room, like same kind of thing where there's like an SSL 4K room and like a Neve room and then a smaller Neve Genesis room.
Sure.
Yeah, like they have all the nice stuff. Last time I recorded drums there, I used a pair of M49s as overheads. It's like, it's just silly, you know?
if you have them, go for it.
It sounded great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wait, so you were saying so now you're transitioning out of there and you're gonna get into a home studio.
So I'm gonna convert this room into a proper mix room slowly over the next month or so, and give up that spot just because we moved into a new place here and there's space for me to work and it just financially makes sense. And I don't do that many attended sessions, so it's not really like I maybe have like 5 clients in a year at this point.
Indoors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like in person attended. So, but because I won't be in this hub where I'm meeting people coming through, I'm going to need to up. I'm assuming I'm going to need to up the like visibility factor again. And so I'm probably my plan is to transition to doing more content again this year, just to keep top of mind and keep meeting people. And
I mean, it sounds like you already have like a great flow going. You know, and that's, I guess, the reason why you haven't had to post as much on social media and whatnot. Speaking of, like, you know, people, I guess the word of mouth thing seems to be working. / I guess you're meeting people at your facility in the mastering studio. You know, I guess I was going to ask you, how does work come your way? How do people find out about you, and or you know, how do you find them? How does the work begin often?
Totally. So. One thing that I actually do, which really helps with this, is at the end of every year, like, so I have a running, just Google Sheets of every song I work on and the producer, and, you know, there's like money information for myself just to know how much I'm making on average per song throughout the year, and just like some stats for myself personally. But basically every year at the end of the year, I go through, make sure that's filled out properly. And then I also add a column where I call it like source of like where the work came from, like whether it was a specific person or whether it was like me working at a certain studio, or whether it was like my website or Instagram, like basically as specific as I can be, like my buddy Tim or Revolution or what, you know what I mean? And then I can sort, and do like a calculation on percentage wise. I'll look and be like, where'd my work come from this year? And it's really cool because I can trace back every single gig to a specific action I took usually in my life of like,
smart.
Yeah. That client found me because 8 years ago, I made those YouTube videos, and his buddy, who's a producer, saw one and DM'd me on Instagram, and then they saw me on Instagram. Like, I can look at them and like I can be like, oh, that happened because of these specific actions I took. It's not random. Yeah, I always kind of love that. It's also like a good just to see that and be like, oh yeah, you're in control of your life. Like, it's not random. If you don't do anything, nothing happens. You know, people won't just find you.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, there's like 100 guys that can mix your song, more than thousands of people that could mix your song. It's going to sound good. Unless you're the Imagine Dragons Grammy guy or whatever, Back in Black guy. You just got to be visible and do good work. But yeah, so a lot of it comes from...
It's almost like planting all these seeds. You know
100%.
I mean? You plant a seed here, you plant a seed there, and some of them turn into trees or eventually turn into trees, or, you know, in 3 years, you know, maybe something happens. But like, you never know.
That's literally about the timeline for a lot of things. Like when I first came here, I had free time and I was like trying to figure out work. We'd had some savings so we could like float ourselves for a few months or whatever. But we both just like, me and my wife just didn't have jobs and we're like moved to a new city and didn't really know anyone. So it was like pretty stressy. One thing is like I volunteered at a couple music festivals and I ended up doing front of house in this tiny, it was like a bar with like one of those mixers that's like a power amp built into it that just like, you know, like cheap whatever, you plug a mic into it and it's the power amp and you just get the speakers out of it, like a little, you know, a little PA for a bar.
Okay.
So, you know, like just really get like super cheap, shitty, like no one needs to run this. But I was like, okay, cool, I'm a volunteer, they just want someone here to make sure the equipment works. And this one guy got up and played and he was like incredible, like just an acoustic guitar kind of folk like kind of thing. And so I just talked to him. I was like, hey man, I really loved your set. Like, it was incredible. Like, I'm so glad you played today. This was like made it worth me even doing this. And he was like, oh, it's so nice. And then I followed up later on Instagram or whatever and just like DM'd him. I was like, hey man, just want to say hi. I loved your thing. No sales pitch. No like, I want to mix your record or record you. But I made sure that it was obvious if he looked what I did. So I made sure my bio had a link in it. Whatever, like my email had a signature that said I was an engineer. And sure enough, like 2 months later, he's like, hey, I noticed you work out of the studio. I might be looking to record something. I was like, yeah, hit me up whenever. And then like 2 years later, we do an album. And it's like, an album's not enough to pay 2 years of rent. But if you're just planting those seeds every day, everywhere, eventually enough of them come up that you're like, oh, I'm doing this now. You know?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it takes persistence, time. And I feel like so many people get bogged down and discouraged. And it's really, there's no other way to do it. It's just to persist long enough. You know what I mean? I feel like you got to be doing this for like at least 5 years to start to see, fruits of your labors. You know what I mean? Like
I forget how long actually, but if you consider, I forget what year I started at the studio, 2007? Anyway, whatever. It's been like, 16 years or something, 15 years since I started trying to do this. I wouldn't say that I made even like, I'm not like rolling in it, but I'm like doing fine now. Like I can, I'm doing better than I ever thought I would. I'll put it that way. It's like, I'm like, not
That's
like
amazing.
I'm not driving like a Bentley, but like, I'm not worried about buying coffees and like I can pay, we live in a nice place now and like everything's pretty good. But I didn't get even close to that until maybe in the last 5 years. So like I was doing this more than a decade before it felt somewhat possible to keep doing this forever. Like, you know what I mean? It's a grind.
I'm 100% with you. I'm about a decade into this, maybe a little bit more. And I'm finally also myself just seeing all the little things that I've done kind of colliding.
Yeah.
It's kind of bizarre. It's like, oh, I worked really hard on that for this many years, and I worked hard on this for this many years, and I've been doing this podcast now for 2.5 years, and like all of a sudden, all these like little things kind of collide, and you realize that this pushing you to like something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. Finally,
100%.
Literally, it's like a decade in the making, and I think like I guess like the takeaway for the audience is just like you have to just keep at it and keep planting those seeds. You know what I mean? Like, and
totally,
it's hard to know when not to give up, but you have to just not give up.
But also it's different for everybody. Some people are happier giving up. You know what I mean? Like it's a kind of a crazy thing to do. And like what I've actually been talking with a few different friends that are also engineers and stuff the last year about this, where it's really like the subjective nature of, especially when you get into mixing and mastering, like the subjective nature of the job paired with the fact that you're kind of making decisions in a bubble that other people still have to like, they have to like, and the artist obviously has to like the mix you did. But most of the time they're not there when you're doing it, unless you live in LA or whatever. It takes a certain kind of mindset and just like a certain kind of person to be able to deal with that, because it's it can be so frustrating, right? Like I could do a mix and we all go through phases with things we like. Maybe I'm in this like, maybe a bit too much low end phase where I like things really thick and like bumping and like it's cool and I don't regret doing it on things, but like I go in and out of that sometimes, right? And you send that to one client and they might be like, this is sick. Like my car speakers, like they didn't blow up, but it was like big and they love it. And one person might be like, what did you do? Like the bass, all I can hear is bass. Like the vocals sound small now. I hate it. And like, it's subjective. It's art. You know what I mean? Like,
so subjective.
It can drive you nuts unless you can deal with it.
Well, on that note, I imagine you're very receptive to mix revisions, mix notes.
Yeah, I mean,
you seem like you're able to kind of have good communications with the artist you're mixing for, right?
Yeah, it's like client service thing. At the end of the day, it's not my song. Like I work on a few hundred songs a year or whatever, and like 150 to 220 is kind of the range depending on the year. Yeah, I work on a lot of songs. I care about all of them. They're like everything I work on to as important to me as everything else, regardless of budget, timeline, artist level, whatever. But I'm not going to probably listen to the song in 20 years from now, or like play it for my grandkids or play it for my kids, or like remember, like if you're not a career artist and say in 10 years you got like kids and they're like, oh, what did you do when you were in your 20s? And you're like, play them this album and you're so proud of it still, like those people are going to have those things later in life. It's very important. And so if they want the vocal to be 5 dB too loud, I'll tell them what I think and give them some professional opinion and examples. But if they're like, no, we love the really loud vocals, I'll be like, okay, cool. Like it's your album. It's totally fine. I'll do it in the way that I can best achieve what they want while still thinking it's, subjectively or objectively good, whichever one, you know what I mean? Like I'm not going to ruin something if someone says something. I'll be like, some people are like, oh, they gave me this note. Well, screw them. Like, fine, I'll turn it up 18 dB. Who cares? Like they're like just kind of being dicks about it. They get like mad.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, this person will listen to this album forever. Like they're going to listen to this in 15 years and be like, remember that thing I did? Like,
I'm 100% on the same page as you.
Yeah,
I'm very generous with mixed revisions. I don't really have a policy.
No,
the policy is like, if it gets out of hand, I guess I'll tell you, but like that doesn't really happen. You know what I mean?
I've been refining that conversation as well over the last few years, because I'm also like, my nature is sort of someone that like, I'll let things slide farther than they should in a lot of situations. Like I'm just pretty easygoing about it, and it takes a lot to really piss me off.
Guilty.
Yeah, totally. And that's good, but it can be detrimental to like the business side of things, depending on, there's certain clients, especially ones that are less experienced, that don't really know, like they just don't know how it goes for most people or have any. So maybe they think like 15 versions is normal, and they want to like, what if it was like this? What if it was like this? That kind of thing. And so the conversation I've kind of boiled it down to is like, I don't really have a limit. Most projects go to like between V3 and V5 max. I'd like to do V1. Once in a while that happens where you're just like, this is it. But usually it's collaborative and there's changes, because like what are the odds of me predicting exactly what you wanted? Or also it's not even what you wanted. Sometimes a lot of times, like I just finished a R&B thing for a new client and his notes were awesome. Like I listened to the first version now and like my mix is way better than the rough. Like it killed the rough. But then you compare V1 to V4 that we landed on, and all his notes were incredible. They made it so much better. And it's like,
I love that.
It's a collaborative thing, right? He's like, and he'll tell me just like, oh, the 808, maybe it could knock a little more, like, and send me a new reference. And I'll listen to this Khalid song and be like, oh, okay. And so now I'm on that. And then it's like, we got the 808 hitting really big, because the Khalid one was like, in my opinion, like the 808 was the loudest thing in the track. It was like crazy loud. But, I did that. And he's like, okay, cool. Now maybe the vocal can come up like a dB. And then it's like, oh, maybe the snare and the hats can come up now at the end. But like, we finally kind of got it to a place where now when I reference it, I'm like, oh, it's way better than V1 just because of the collaboration, the changes. But anyway, point is no limits. V3 or V4 is like pretty normal. If it goes past V5 or 6 and it's not like half dB vocal changes or something specific that's like maybe important but not a big detail, okay. But if it's like, if we're just after V3, if we're like just trying things for the sake of it, we have to talk about this, because that's like a production thing. Like you guys should have a direction or be open to, more open to my interpretation of it if you're hiring me. Like, it's like we should trust me more.
Yeah, totally. But, they're hiring you for a reason, right? Because they've heard the way you mix, and
I always say like, listen,
presumably like that.
I'm like, listen to my Spotify reel. There's a lot of like, I got to delete some stuff on there, because there's over 100 songs right now on my mixing reel, which is way too many. But like, I just add throughout the year as songs I like that I worked on. And I was like, skim it. And if in general you're like, oh, this sounds good, then it's a good fit. If you're like, listen to the whole like 5 songs and you're like, I don't know, the vocals are too loud in all of them. Maybe I hear it differently than you. And maybe we can still work together, but we just come into it knowing that maybe my preferences for that are different than yours, and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it,
Yeah, totally. Well, speaking of your mixes, I really like your mixes. I think they're awesome.
Oh,
and I'm just like, scrolling through your Spotify, just like even briefly, just like, okay, there's something that ties it together. And I just feel like your mixes just pop out of the speakers in a way that not everybody is able to do.
Oh, thanks.
Like they're just like very like alive. I don't know, just like it's like coming out of the speakers more than I hear most stereo mixes,
Oh, amazing. Thanks.
Maybe. Yeah, totally. I don't know. What does a mix look like for you usually? Like, I don't know. You get a song, like what's your first step?
So depends on the client. If it's something that's like got a producer and it's pretty, like well produced and dialed in pretty well, and the rough already sounds good, I'll ask for stems as close as possible to what I was hearing in the rough. So I want to start from where they left off, more or less. If they're doing any crazy multi-band on the mix bus or like any really heavy-handed mix bus things, I'll ask them to bypass that stuff, but then send me screenshots of what they had. And so basically, like, I want to start where they left off exactly. For lead vocals, I always want to get a version